Guruve Gauri Chandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhuve Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavad Pranam devotees. I am trying to catch up on some questions that have been sent to me, and actually they have been sent some time ago, and some of them have doubled up, for lack of a better word. In other words, somebody wrote a question, and unfortunately I didn't get back to them timely, so they doubled down and wrote the question again, and with an additive because they recently viewed or heard something, and they were asking me about that as well. I only have time to deal with the one question today, and praying at the lotus feet of my Guru Parapadma Nittalila Praveshtam Vishnu Pada Paramhamsa Asto Tarasata Sisima Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and our whole entire Rupanuga Guru Varga, that they'll bestow their causeless mercy on me to be able to repeat what I've heard from our Guru Varga to answer the question. I wanted to be clear that Prabhuji, I'm talking to you directly kind of now, that we did have this discussion back in 2015, and I had the same answers then that I do now, and I'm happy also that you were able to hear the podcast that you were speaking about, and have some doubling down on that answer, and certainly over the course of these years now, 7 or 8 years, whatever it is, that you've had time to marinate on it. I was happy to hear that you're beginning to have some sense of resonance with that answer. You wanted me to show you in Jaiva Dharma, particularly the section regarding why, in the original discussion we had years ago, which I'm shocked that you have noted, where Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has mentioned his rationale or reasoning for giving the narrative of the jiva manifesting from Tatastha Shakti. So I do want to make one clarification, and that's that even in our original conversation back then, I had mentioned that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was not really more or less creating a narrative about the jivas coming from Tatastha Shakti. He was giving a narrative as examples to answer the question of Brajanath, which was, what does it mean to be Tatastha Swabhav? So Tatastha Swabhav means being of the nature of the marginal potency. What is the characteristics of being the marginal potency? And then he asked, can you give me examples from the Vedic Shastra as Praman in order to show this, what is Tatastha Swabhav? So, in line with answering that question, of course, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur goes on to give various answers, including quoting from the 4th chapter of the Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad. And there he gave an example as well of a fish being situated in a lake with 2 borders, and the fish swimming from one side to another. He gave this example to demonstrate how the jiva being situated in Tatastha Swabhav has the tendency to be influenced by either the Antaranga Shakti of Bhagavan, Swarup Shakti, or by the material or Bahiranga Shakti of Bhagavan, means Avidya Shakti or Maya. So he was not really describing though he gave for pictorial elucidation an example of an imperceptible line demarcating land and water, he was not setting up that as a history of the jiva being situated in such a place and then having, like the fish, looked, or in some cases gone to one side of the bank or another, and then chosen whatever outcome they've had. And we've discussed, for many reasons, there would be just too many questions that would arise. For instance, if you had the opportunity to look one way or another and then make a choice, what was the information base for the choice that you made? Because we know if the jiva does not have Swarup Shakti, then the Paratattva Gyan, or the realization of what is Krishna's nature, what is Krishna's Swarup, what is Krishna's Dham, etc., is not understandable by the jiva. So even if you took the ontological position that the jiva was situated somewhere and was making a choice, the information base of that choice would come into question, right? Because under what circumstances did they choose? Also, if the jiva had never been within the context of Maya or the Avidya Shakti, what was the basis of attraction to Maya that said, hey, well, I'll take this choice and go to Maya? So if you take that the jiva simply had a position which was uninfluenced by either Shakti and then made a choice, all of these questions would arise. So obviously, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was using the examples of an idea in a narrative that we were situated in a marginal position, and having observed both situations, then made a choice which was a misuse of free will and entered into avidya, or into the material world. But of course we know that in Sastra it's been mentioned, and I'm going to show directly how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, according to his own writing here in Jaiva Dharma, recognized this point, that there are only two states of a jiva. One is that they are either nitya siddha, eternally accomplished, and there is no ability to fall or to be corrupted by any influence of ignorance from that position of being nitya siddha, or anadi bada. Nitya bada, anadi bada are synonyms that are sometimes used. So anadi bada literally means being within the or under the influence of Maya from time without any beginning. And the Paramatma Sundara Jiva Goswami has directly quoted Anadi Paravatatva Jnana Samsarga Bhava Maya, that the jiva's abhav of Paratattva Gyan, which means Swarup Shakti, the realization of who am I, who is Bhagavan, etc., has been abhav, or absent in the jiva, from anadi, a time without any beginning. Similarly, in Srimad Bhagavatam itself, which is our mool praman for everything, in the 11th canto, I think it's 22nd chapter, verse 10 perhaps, it says, Anadi avidya yukta sha purushasha atma vedanam svato nasambhavanti anya gyanatva ganado bhavet. So here it's saying that the jivas has been yukta to avidya from anadikal. So similarly, there's so much evidence like this of the jivas having been connected with the avidya shakti from time without beginning. Also, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Pad's Tika in Sa'artavarsini, the commentary on Bhagavad Gita, in the 13th chapter, 20th verse, he asks and answers this very question, that it may be considered when and how the jiva had connection with the material energy, and from when. And he directly answers that the jiva's connection is anadi, it's without any beginning. And this is inclusive of their karmas and everything else. So we do have Praman directly stating that the jivas sojourn in the material world has been without any beginning. Jiva Goswami, however, says that the word anadi literally means something that has no beginning, but it does have an end. So we should not be hopeless that I've been somehow cast into an eternal situation of inability to establish a relationship with the absolute truth, because that's also not true. Anadi doesn't mean perpetual. Anadi means it doesn't have a beginning, but Jiva Goswami says it does have an end. The end comes when there's contact with the influence of the internal energy, which comes in the form of contact with a sadhu. Like in the verse, Brahmane Brahmatiko and the Bhagavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Poi, Bhakti Lata Bij, or Sava Sangamena Ratnya Ankur Rupa Eva Mati. So Mati means discrimination. The discrimination that arises in the jiva that prompts questions like the ones asked by Srila Sanatana Goswami Pada Mahaprabhu. Keami, Kenyamai, Jare Taputrai. So when the jiva starts to consider, well, who really am I? I'm not just this material body. This material world is temporal. What is the absolute truth? These questions are prompted when one meets sadhu and the seed of bhakti in the form of mati or vivek, discrimination, curiosity arises. That allows the jiva at that time, by the utilization of their faith, to begin to turn inward under the guidance of a sadhu or guru, and then begin the process of Krishna Seva Vasanam, the tendency for Seva to Bhagavan. And then it unfolds through the stages of Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana, Kriya, Natanavitti, Nishta, Ruchi, Shakti, and then with the descent of Swarup Shakti, Sudha Sattva Visheshatma, Prem Sriyansa Samyava, Ruchi Bis Chittamasrinya, Kridaso Bhavuchate. At that time, with the descent of Swarup Shakti, excuse me, the illumination comes in the heart, and from that illumination, one recognizes who is Bhagavan and concomitantly who they are, and what is the nature of the relationship, etc., etc. So let's go back to our original point here, which is why Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur chose, and I'm going to read directly from Jaiva Dharma, why he chose to use the narrative of a jiva being situated in a marginal position and making a choice and the misuse of free will, etc., etc., that we've become accustomed to. Because even after devotees had been able to digest that our Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, our Srila Prabhupada, also used the narrative in order to give a sense of a constitutional relation with Krishna by saying that we were with Krishna and then we fell to this world out of misuse of our free will, and now we're in the process of reviving our original consciousness. That narrative, of course, Srila Prabhupada also directly in the 7th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, I think text 130, chapter 1, text 35, he clarified if there was any misunderstanding that jivas are falling out of the spiritual world. He clearly mentions that in regard to Jai and Vijay, which is an example possibly of that unless there was something to be done on behalf of the Lord, it should be concluded that no one falls from Vaikuntha. So at best, even if devotees had some confusion, you'd have to reconcile that there were two statements. If you took the statement that Srila Prabhupada wrote in a letter, or sometimes wrote in his books even, that we were with Krishna and fell, here he has another statement which appears to be a more conclusive statement, straightening out if there was any misconception about the jivas falling, that they do not fall from Vaikuntha. At best, you'd have to take these two statements and say, well, there's two things said here. Let me find reconciliation. That reconciliation obviously would be according to our template of how we reconcile things, which is Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. If there was an examination of Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra, we would see that the latter statement of Srila Prabhupada in the 7th canto is the Siddhanta, and that the narrative given was for the purpose of assisting us, just as what I'm reading about Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur here. So it begins with Brajanath, not the beginning of the chapter, but the beginning of the section that is appropriate to what we're discussing. Brajanath asked the question, you said earlier that the Chit world is eternal, and so are the jivas. If this is true, how can an eternal entity possibly be created, manifested, or produced? If it is created at some point in time, it must have been non-existent before that. So how can we accept that it is eternal? So this is how actual guru-disciple relationship should work. Tajman Guru Papradita Jigyasya Shreyottamam. Jigyasya, or inquiry, relative inquiry, is the basis under which a guru-disciple relationship works. Same in Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidi Pranipatena Pariprishna Sevaya. Pariprishna, or relevant inquiries, have to be there in order to make clarification of something. So Brajanath is asking that you've mentioned many times things which give indication of a jiva having been either manifested, produced, or created at some point. At the same time, you've said the jiva is eternal, so he's looking for clarification. So Babaji is answering that question. So Babaji Maharaj then says, the time and space that you experience in the material world are completely different from time and space in the spiritual world. Material time is divided into three aspects: past, present, and future. However, in the spiritual world, there's only undivided time, or eternally present time. This is called Nitya Vartmanakal, right? You'll hear this term a lot if you're doing any deep study of these things. What is Prakriti-kal or Prakat-kal, and what is Nitya Vartmanakal, right? The difference between material time and eternal time. And it's mentioned, Na cha kalavikramaha, in the second canto Srimad Bhagavatam, that material time has no influence in the spiritual world. Srila Prabhupada had mentioned directly from Sastra that time is conspicuous by its absence in the spiritual world. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was first saying that because we experience everything in Prakriti-kal, or in material time, and material time is divided into past, present, and future, it is very difficult to speak without the influence of that time as we are experiencing it coming into play. I'll continue reading. Whenever we say or describe in the material world, whatever we describe in the material world is under the jurisdiction of material time and space. So when we say the jivas were created, the spiritual world was manifested, or that there's the influence of Maya in creating the form of the jivas, material time is bound to influence our language and our statements. This is inevitable in our conditioned state. So we cannot remove the influence of material time from our descriptions of the nature or atomic nature of the jiva and the spiritual objects. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, first of all, is qualifying his use of certain language in the examples that he had given to Brajanath, right? That actually don't take them literally. So don't take the narratives that I've mentioned as a literal historical account of something related to the jiva. They were all examples, and I'm going to try to get to that section now if I could just find it here. They were examples to explain what is Tatashta Swabhav. He then goes on to say, and this is an important part, all Vaishnavas say that the jiva is an eternal servant of Krishna, and that his eternal nature is to serve Krishna. This is also mentioned both by Baladevi Vijabhushan and Jiva Goswami Pad, Dasabhuta Haryeva Nanyasheva Kadachana. That constitutionally, just like in the verse, Jivera Sarupavaya Krishna Nitya Das, constitutionally everyone is the Das of Krishna. Dasitva is the nature of the Atma. But that Dasitva is not realized or manifest until the influence of Swarup Shakti comes. Right? It cannot change the reality that we're the Das of Krishna, right? But the manifestation of the Vaishishya of the Dasitva, the speciality of what kind of Das, etc., is when there's the descent of Swarup Shakti. Right? His eternal nature is to serve Krishna, and that he is now bound by Maya. So also Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur here is encapsulating kind of why, in one sense, the narrative is used. Because the Vaishnavas understand in our constitution, we are servants of Krishna. Now we're bound by Maya. So in many ways, whatever narrative or construction of a methodology is being used is to help the jiva in order to make that connection. So it's not something that is used to try to, like Jiva Goswami Pad, his mission and commission within our parampara was to establish the siddhanta of that Srimad Bhagavatam is our Mool Praman, and he quoted from several other places to prove the points of Srimad Bhagavatam as they were taught by Sriman Mahaprabhu. That was his mission and commission. So he left no stone unturned in revealing what is the Siddhanta. The mission and commission of Bhaktivinoda Thakur was that, having recognized that Jiva Goswami has already established this, now I am making the endeavor to bring the jivas from their conditioned state to bhakti. It wasn't like Jiva Goswami also did not have that mission, but his section of activity in the overall mission was the establishment of the Siddhanta. That's already been done. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, historically, I think in Swalikita Jivani, he's written that he studied for more than 10 years the Sandarbhas while he was in Puri. So he was not unaware. And if you look at the chapters of Javadharma closely, you'll see the paraphrasing of the Sandarbhas. 15th chapter, you'll see that it paraphrases in many ways Paramatma Sandarbha, right? But he's taken particular care to create a narrative, and we'll get to the point of why he does that here shortly, but to create a narrative that simply allows the jiva to understand you have a constitutional relationship with Krishna, you are now in the throngs of Maya, and the idea is to get you to understand this nature, take up the practice of bhakti, and through Nam Bhajan and Kripa to realize your constitutional reality. Right? So he says, because he has forgotten his eternal nature. So Krishna Bhuli Se Jeev Anadi Bhai Hedamo. So here, of course, the word forgotten, again in English, indicates within the frame of time that I knew something at one time and then forgot it. But the actual usage of the word here is not indicative of that, because the jiva never had actual realization of Krishna, because if he did, it could not be broken. Right? If you've realized the relationship with Krishna, Savata Dongsharaitam Yarapi Dongshakarane, it cannot be broken. Even if there was a cause, quote, for it to be broken, it does not break. In the spiritual world, whenever a cause arises that the relationship with Krishna could be broken, it acts as a udipan or stimulus to strengthen the relationship. Yad bhava bandhano yuno. Prem parikirtita. This is one definition of prem. Right? So it's not being used in that sense. However, now this is important. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, or he's quoting that Babaji's telling to Brajanath, however, everyone knows. So he's saying the whole Vaishnava Mandal, everyone knows the jiva is an eternal entity of which there are two types, Nitya Mukta and Nitya or Anadi Bhada. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur right here is clarifying. Listen, I'm telling you all the things about the Tatashta, etc., but we know the jivas only exist in two states. So how is there a third state of the jiva, which would be called a locus or standing in a place called the Tatashta, where they're situated, void of either being in a liberated condition or a vidya bound condition? There is no third state that's mentioned. He's saying everyone knows the jivas are of two types, Nitya Siddha and Nitya Bhada or Nadi Bhada. So he's acknowledging that right here. So then the question comes, well then why would he then go on to use such a narrative? So then he explains it. The subject has been explained in this way only because the conditioned human intellect being controlled by pramad. So here they've translated the word pramad as inattentiveness. But if you look in the Sanskrit dictionary, it has many meanings, but they're very similar. Pramad means intoxicated, overwhelmed, when the chitta is overwhelmed by distraction and so many things. It's also pramad, right? So the ordinary person in samsari life, means like material life, they're obviously overwhelmed with considerations of maintenance, family life, children, all kinds of other things that are just part of everyday material life. Therefore, what kind of attention can they give to the deep digging in the matter of understanding Siddhanta? If you read the commentary on Vedanta Sutra, Baladev Vijayabhushan Prabhu, Govinda Bhashya, or you read the Sandarbhas, Paramatma Sandarbha, etc., what kind of concentration and mindset and freedom from distraction it takes to go through, even under guidance, the study of those works. What to speak that any ordinary jiva completely absorbed in their material life can, in a leisurely way, just digest those things. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, I've given a narrative here because for those jivas whose intellect, meaning the chitta, their consciousness, everything is controlled by pramada and attentiveness, they would be unable to comprehend the subject matter. So here, right here, is the direct statements of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur through the narration here that he manifested in his samadhi of Babaji mentioning to Brajanath, this explanation is necessary because the ordinary jiva is pramad. Now also attach that to the time period of the teaching of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and look at the atmosphere in which he was preaching, which in many ways is similar to the atmosphere that we have now, right? Where there's so many people who, being absorbed in material life, they don't have the time for deep understanding of Sanskrit language, deep understanding of all kinds of Siddhantic concepts. So in order to create a narrative that was digestible, and this also extends now to the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the manifest fulfillment of the desire of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And ultimately, all were the direct manifestation of the prophecy of Mahaprabhu. That this Harinam would spread to every town and village. In this instance, in Chaitanya Bhagavat, Mahaprabhu was not just talking about Namakshara, that everywhere people would be saying Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He meant the Swarupa of Harinam as well. It means the conceptions of praying, the conceptions of what is Harinam, Namachintamani Krishna Chaitanya Ras Vigraha. This whole everything would spread all over the world. But in the packaging prior to the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and sort of at the junction point of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the way of practice of the Pariwars as they had come down from Mahaprabhu. And then, of course, you have the writing by Dhyana Chandra Goswami of Gaura Govindachan, Smaran Padati, etc. This methodology of practice would not have been suitable as a methodology for the entrance into the path of bhakti by millions and millions of jivas all over the world who have no background, no adhikar, no experience. But the packaging, according to the narrative given in Jaiva Dharma, according to the manifest practice and system set up in Gaudiya Math by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it was something that had the ability to both be digested and accepted and practically practiced by people all over the world. So this was the manifest fulfillment of Mahaprabhu's prophecy. We cannot negate that fact, right? So this reasoning that it was done was what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says here. So now this brings us to the point. Is there a situation in which the jivas were situated in a place called Tatashta, and from the Tatastha Shakti made a choice, having observed both situations, again, on what information base they observed both situations, nobody has said, right? And then made a choice which was the obvious now in retrospect, misuse of free will. Actually, when you look at it, this is not the case. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying himself, this was my original point, I don't want to lose that fact, that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is mentioning he himself has acknowledged two states of the jiva And he's also acknowledged this rationale and reasoning for explaining to touch the Swabhav to Brajanath using this methodology of giving a narrative like he gave, inclusive of the example from Brihad Aranyaki Upanishad. If you look at Brihad Aranyaki Upanishad, that section, the 4th chapter, deals with the alternate states of consciousness of a jiva, between the waking state, the sleeping state, and the state of transition in between one body and another. So that section of Brihad Aranyaki Upanishad really wasn't even directly dealing with to touch the swabhava of a jiva. But it was an apt example to explain the idea of being influenced by either the external energy or the internal energy. So it was an apt example. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, for this reason, he used it. Now, what's the reality? The reality is what I mentioned from Srimad Bhagavatam. The jiva sojourn within the material atmosphere is anadi. It's without any beginning. So this always raises a very difficult issue. And that is the issue of the sense of injustice that would be apparent in having been in the material world without having voluntarily or by choice come here, right? And I'm just here and being punished and suffering. So a couple of things, and I'm going to have to take leave, so I'll try to wrap this up. One is the concept of suffering itself. In Paramatma Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami has described, in the many ways he has described the Atma, ontologically speaking, is Chidananda Atmaka. That the Atma is Chit Ananda. He then gives the commentary that here Chit means he's not jud, he's not inert. And Ananda here means Dukkha Pratiyogita. Dukkha Pratiyogita means that there is no misery in the Atma itself. So from where has misery come in the life of the jiva? Well, the jiva's vicarious identification with avidya, because the jivas and avidya never directly touch. Asango hi anyam purusha. The Atma never comes in contact directly with material energy. But by vicarious identification with the influence, the prabhav of avidya shakti, then the jiva comes under the idea asmi. I am somebody other than being the das of Krishna. Right? This asmi gives rise to ahamkara. Ahamkara means aham, I. So this is the first part of the asmi, or the identification, self-abhiman of a jiva, which is a mistake. Because the jiva is not aham. The jiva is dasosmi. He's not aham. Like Krishna says, aham savasha pravavo. Right? Krishna is aham. He is truly the karana and character of everything, but not the jiva. So ahamkara means aham, karana and karta. I am the doer and cause of activities. In Bhagavad Gita is clear. Prakriti kriya manani gunai kamani savasha ahamkara vimudatma. This is a state of bewilderment. Katamiti manyate. Everything is actually going on by the Shakti of Bhagavan, his Maya Shakti, in the form of the 3 modes of material nature. So the jiva is not the doer or cause of any of these things. From ahamkara, by our karmic package from one life to another, karmana, dhaivana, natrena, jantar, dehopapatye, right? Striya uttapravesta, pungsamreta karanasaya. In the material world, we all take birth by entering into the womb, and then we're born from the womb with a particular karmic portfolio, right? That karmic portfolio gives rise to upadi. Upadi means a particular designation. I am so-and-so, John Doe, my mother is Jane Doe, and I was born in this place, and to this race, to this culture, etc., etc. I am male, female, etc., right? So all of this is in upadi. Through that upadi, we make vicarious identification with the modes of nature and the drama of it that's shown on the chitta. So observing the chitta, the jiva under bewilderment thinks, yes, that's me, I'm in this drama. Much in the same way that anybody watching a movie or a drama play or something, they become absorbed and give emotional investment into that drama or movie or whatever it might be, and they identify with the characters there. That's exactly what's happening with the Atma and the Chitta and the influence or Prabhav of the external energy. And then there's rag, dvesh, and abhinivesh means the absorption is so thick that the jiva cannot self-extricate themselves. That's why in that verse in the 11th canto it says swato na sambhavanti. The jiva cannot pull themselves out of it. Anya requires another. Jnanatva ganadobhavet. Someone who is self-realized and someone who has the karun shakti or the kindness or disposition to assist you. So the jiva sojourn here is from an adikal. And the idea that they have been put into a place of suffering is really not true. Anato pasamam sakshat. Even in Bhagavatam it's mentioning that the so-called suffering of the jiva is superfluous. It was for this reason, it says, Chakra Sattva Samhitam, that Vyasadeva wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam to allow you to know what you think is suffering is actually superfluous to you. It's not the Atma that's suffering. It's the vicarious identification of the Atma that's creating suffering. So we can't look back and say, oh, Bhagavan put me in, from time without any beginning, in a position of suffering. And the nature of being tatashta, or tatashta swabhav, is the potential to come under the influence of the external energy. You understand? So there is no fault here. There is no one to blame here. Also, sometimes the idea comes, why am I being put into a position of suffering, etc. Right? And here we'll have to take a self-examination. That simply by surrendering to the process of bhakti, that suffering can be alleviated. So now the question is, I don't have to think all the way back to a time beyond my thinking, which is where the phrase time immemorial has blossomed from. Think back 2 minutes ago. Was I surrendered? As I've been giving this answer in service to Prabhu, well, the person who asked the question, I have to consider, have I fully done Saranagati? So, being Tatashta is not a historical event, it is a tendency. And that tendency is active even now, until we become Saranagat. And we begin to, by the influence of Guru and Sadhu, become extricated from the influence of Avijja Shakti and begin to have the influence of Swarup Shakti in our life. So, long story short, the jiva has not also come from Tatashta. The jiva is Tatashta Shakti. And this tendency of being Tatashta Shakti avails it to the influence of either energy, Antaranga Shakti or Bahiranga Shakti, right? From time without any beginning, we have been under the influence of the external energy, but by the grace of Shri Guru and Krishna, Guru Krishna Prasade Poi, Bhakti Lata Bij, that seed of discrimination I spoke about, Mati, has come, and now also the tendency, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, whatever it might be, there has been a leaning towards trying to serve Krishna beginning with faith. This is called Krishna Seva Vasan, right? And so now we're growing according to everybody's self-examination. We're growing through the process of bhakti, right? Shraddha is the essential element. That Shraddha is growing, and it's growing through stages. What is Sadhu Sangha? Because it doesn't mean, it's not like these steps are like black and white things that we're stepping on and then going to the next one. In the course of our faith, there'll be realization, what is sadhu? Sadnoti Sadaichita Krishna Premiti Sadhu. And then understanding who is sadhu, that person who's understood Sadvastu, the eternal reality to be Krishna Prem, taking shelter of that person, right, by Diksha, right? What is Diksha, etc., etc. I'm going off course here. But anyways, unfolding through the process, clearly understanding what is sadhu, and then under the guidance of sadhu doing bhajan, understanding what this means to really do bhajan, right? And then anartha nivritti is a byproduct of the influence of bhajan. Just as turning on a light dissipates darkness, the influence of bhajan dissipates the tendency for anarthas, right? And destroys them in gradual stages. Ek bahu ashini bahu, right? It's mentioned in Madhurya Kandamini, right? So, hopefully, Prabhu, this was a question generated from a couple of weeks ago, but it was a discussion that we had way back in 2015. And of course, my insight by the influence of my Guru Pada Padma has not really changed, right? Oh, and as far as the podcast is concerned, you asked me about what I thought of Maharaj's presentation. I'm not speaking Maharaj's name only because I don't have permission to do that. But I was on another class. I had a class of my own earlier that day. So I only caught perhaps the last quarter of the podcast. And I've spoken to Maharaj before, and I know by my speaking to him before, what he has spoken is Siddhanta. What he has spoken is Siddhanta. As far as the origin of the Jiva and that podcast, what he told there, that we have not come from either to Tashta, we have not fallen from the spiritual world, etc. This is Siddhanta according to our Guru Vargas. Think that. So my Dandavat Pranam at the lotus feet of my Guru Parapadma, my Guru Parampara, and also I'm praying to all devotees to give me your causeless mercy to go on doing seva in the Vaishnava Mandal. Jai Vanchakalpa Turvishcha Kripa Sindhavevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.